All right. Now, I came across this article the other day. It was shared by someone I know on social media who's living in Finland. They're not from Finland, but they're living in Finland. And as an immigrant to Finland, typically a lot of these young people, they just fall into the predictable lines of aligning themselves with other immigrants of whatever ethnicity or racial group or religion. And in a sense, aligning themselves against the native Finns, against the native people. Maybe not in an explicit way, but implicitly, they're kind of taking a side there against the local people and looking out for their own interests, even if that means undermining Finnish people themselves. That's what I find tends to happen with, and it's not just people from the broader second or third world. It's also other Europeans. I find if they move into other European countries, it's interesting how often they will take the side of other immigrants against the native people, against the local people. That seems to be a very common trend amongst young European people who've emigrated rather into other European countries, and of course other non-Europeans who've moved into Europe as well. But there isn't that. You would imagine there would be a certain kinship there between Europeans of different ethnicities. But a lot of these young millennials in particular, they will take the side of the immigrant against the native people of the country, and people who would be closer to themselves culturally, ethnically, but they will still take on the mantle of the outsider against the domestic Europeans. That I find interesting. Anyway, the article here. So, why does Finland seek talent from abroad but neglect highly skilled foreigners in the country? So again, it's a kind of, how can Finland look after us? How can we get the Finns to look after us? Never mind the Finns looking after themselves. Never mind the Finns looking after their own interests. How can they look after us foreigners in your country? Okay, how can we get the Finns to look after us foreigners who have been allowed into the country, who have been allowed into your system, But we want you to look after us. We're not going to look after ourselves. We want you guys, you native Europeans, to look after us outsiders, us foreigners. So that framing straight away, it speaks volumes. And, the people who wrote this article are not Europeans, or at least two of them aren't Europeans. And the third one, I'm not sure where she's from. She's certainly not Finnish. She's not Scandinavian. And from her name, I would suspect that she's not from Europe. But I could be wrong in that. But regardless, none of them are Finnish anyway. So the article is, okay, I'll go through a little bit of it here. In this text, we challenge Finland's urge to attract international talent while neglecting existing international talent. Not Finnish talent, but international talent in the country. We argued that these policies ignore the highly educated foreigners. Okay, again, it's about the foreigners. It's about, how can you guys look after us? Okay, neglect your own. Okay, don't worry about Finns. Okay, not important. How can you look after us foreigners in your country? So we argued that these policies ignore the highly educated foreigners and migrants whose talent is wasted in underemployment and unemployment. Scrutinizing the barriers to foreigners for adequate employment allows us to grasp the various structural factors. Structural. They're planting the word structural there. Why? Because then they can talk about structural racism, So that's a strategic word thrown in there later, which will later be used as a means of undermining the the native Finn, okay, who they want to accuse of structural racism. Not the powerful people in society. No, your next door neighbor, the average Finnish person, the average European. That's who they want to point a finger at. So here are the people here. So Jawaria Khan, okay, so obviously from the Indian subcontinent, most likely Pakistan. Olivia Maori. Maori is not particularly a name that would originate from Europe, possibly an American. Unlikely to be of European stock, at least there's that. And Quivin Ndomo, who's Kenyan. So yeah. Okay, so the article basically is talking about Finland seemingly is looking abroad, looking outside to try and bring foreigners into Finland for work purposes, presumably. Um, so, what is the reason for attracting more talent from abroad when Finland wastes so much talent? So, it talks here about segmented and differentiated labour markets. How many foreigners in Finland are working in what would be considered lower paid work, even though quite a few of them have university degrees. Talks about residency and difficulties in relation to the residency system, and how much that costs and so on. This part I found interesting. Language proficiency as a recruitment barrier. Now, the first mention of racism, I'm sure it didn't take too long, of course, before they came on to racism as a possible reason for foreigners not getting employment in Finland. Nothing to do with yourselves, nothing to do with your own abilities, your own qualifications, your own experience. No, it has to be to do with racism. So again, it's the victim thing. They're falling into the Marxian dialectic of oppressor versus oppressed. You're eternally oppressed as the foreigner, and the reason why you're not getting that, kind of that 100 grand job, that must be to do with racism, structural racism. It couldn't possibly be to do with the fact that you might not be the right person for the job in terms of your experience, in terms of your qualifications, in terms of your attitude. If you've got that victim attitude from the start, who would want to hire you, realistically? And here's an example of unthinging, okay? So you see down here, the bottom part, last 2 lines of this paragraph. Language often becomes connected to a quest for a specific Finnish ethnicity, in inverted commas. Unthinging. They're suggesting that Finnish ethnicity is not a thing. It's not a legitimate category. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as Finnish ethnicity. All right? So this is something that is going on across the board, across all European ethnic identities are being targeted by these people, by people who often originate from outside Europe, whether they be originally from Africa, from parts of Asia, whether it be of Jewish origin, whether they be from the broader Anglo-American empire, if you like, outside of Ireland and Britain. Okay, I use that word loosely, Anglo-American. In terms of influence, I'm talking about Ireland is very much influenced by the Anglo-American empire. So Aussies, New Zealanders, Canadians, Americans, perhaps South Africans, a lot of these people would have certain attitudes which would have stemmed from this overt influence of Anglo-American culture, if you like. So, but yeah, unthinging, Finnish ethnicity. There is no such thing as Finnish ethnicity. That is what she's saying. Why? Because to be of Finnish stock, yes, it makes life easier in a sense for you in Finland. But why wouldn't it? How dare a country, how dare people of a certain ethnic group within their own country, how dare they perhaps find it a little bit easier in terms of navigating that country's society? How dare they? I mean, would you go to an African country or some part of Asia and, go to that country and straight away assume that country is going to be set up for you as a European, as an Irish person? Just automatically assume that, oh, I expect Pakistan or I expect, Kenya to bend itself to my will. I don't speak any of the native language, but I expect to be hired into 100,000K job in Kenya. I expect to walk into a job paying 80K in Pakistan, Why? Because I'm Irish or I'm European, because I don't speak any of the local language. Do you see how ridiculous? Do you see how privileged in a way this attitude is? How such people have no sense of themselves. They have no kind of self-awareness, no sense of cultural sense of awareness. And This is the kind of privilege, in a sense, that some of these people tend to have when they come into European societies. A kind of a me, a narcissism. I want I want my ideal job now. I'm coming into Europe as a foreigner, and I expect to have the best of everything. I expect to get my ideal job despite having very little of the native language. You know, um, it is this kind of a lack of awareness, and an unwillingness to adapt to the cultural norms of the country that you have been allowed to come into. You know, and this seems to be very prevalent in Europe, particularly. People coming into European countries and expecting things, expecting to fall on their feet, expecting the country to bend to their will, not the will of their own people, but to their will as a foreigner in Europe, in European countries. And it is that kind of sense of entitlement that is just walking off the pages of this article. Me. How can you, Finland, look after me as a foreigner? Never mind your own people. How can you look after me as a foreigner in your own country? That's the sense of entitlement of the authors of this article. Networking, then they come to networking and they say that, you know, Finland is all about networking, and the jobs, 85% of the jobs are probably going to Finns. Why? Because they're not advertised. So basically it's all about who you know, nepotism, Finns looking out for Finns. Couldn't possibly be about foreigners looking after foreigners. That never happens, of course. Oh, that never happens. That never happens in Finland. That never happens in Europe. That never happens in all these different foreign communities across Europe. God, no. Absolutely not. It's only native Europeans looking after native Europeans. That's all that's happening. There's no nepotism. There's no, what would you call it? People looking out for each other in the various different, like, Islamic communities and black communities and Indian and Chinese and so on. That never happens. No, it's only Finns looking out for Finns and Irish looking out for Irish and Europeans looking out for Europeans. That's the only kind of in-group preference that exists. Well, you know yourself, the reality is the opposite. Europeans have the least in-group preference of all groups. They have way less in-group preference than blacks, way less than Chinese, than most Asians, than Muslims, than Jews, of course. Perhaps the highest in-group preference of all, and yet it is Europeans that are castigated as being the ones that look out for themselves, while we are the ones that are the least likely to look out for ourselves. And again, coming to more reasons apparently for why foreigners are not getting, the ideal job that they want in Finland. And again, they're coming back to ethnicity. All right. As a person studying and working in Finland said in a research interview, just having a Finnish degree won't take me to where I want, suggesting that the recognition of skills is bound to racist imaginaries of ethnicity and not really qualifications or skills. So they're saying that Finns are hiring Finns basically because they're Finnish, and that the recognition of skills is bound to racist imaginaries of ethnicity. It seems like they're all the three women who write this, they are all, making up the excuse of the reason why foreigners like them are not getting their ideal, highly paid job in Finland. It must be due to Finns just hiring other Finns. Again, it couldn't possibly be due to the fact that foreign person in Finland might not, have a very good, competent level of Finnish. They might not have the requisite skills that are required. They might not have the requisite experience that is required. They might just have a bad attitude, like these three women. The impression I'm getting, anyway, is that they have a kind of an entitled attitude, a kind of a gimme attitude. How do you look after me? How do you Finns look after me, foreign person in your society? How do you bend over backwards for me as a foreign person in your Finnish society? That's what I want you to do. And so on and so on, you can take a look at that in more detail if you want. Right, okay. No fairyland of equality. Finland is not a fairyland of equal job opportunities. Right. Okay, and so on. Okay, and just the last sentence there. In place of advocating for more, better, brighter talents, we should continue scrutinizing why knowledgeable people already in Finland do not seem to qualify for this pool of expertise. Is the objective to actually import global talent, or is it so that only certain predefined figures with the right kind of social, ethnic, and geographical background fit the category of talent? You know, so they're kind of missing they're missing the overall trust of what is happening here. And that's something I tried to explain to the person who shared this article on Facebook a little while ago. I said, well, I'll come to what I said in a minute, but they're missing the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that, the neoliberals who run our societies, they don't care too much really about the individual ethnicities or racial identities of people coming in. They mostly just want more people in the country. They want more foreigners in the country. So just because you have X amount of foreigners in the country, it doesn't mean they're not going to bring in more foreigners, which is what they're doing because they want more people in the country. They want more consumers. More people means more consumers, means more spending, more economic transactions, more revenue, more profits for businesses, bigger pool of of labor there for employers, more people in the country, more competition for resources, pushes up rents, pushes up house prices. This is the kind of thing that is being overlooked by the authors of this article. They're missing the bigger picture essentially in their victim narrative.